Everyone said if there was one word they would use to describe 22-year-old Drew Sjodin, it would be busy. She was always up to something. In 2003, she was a senior at the University of North Dakota and studying graphic arts. Drew had been an honour student and homecoming queen and was now part of the Gamma Phi Beta sorority. If her college studies weren't keeping her busy enough, she had 2 part-time jobs and volunteered with children's groups, helped kids in the kindergarten learn to read, and raised money for various charities. Drew never thought twice about offering support and giving up what little time she had to help other people. Her brother said that in school when she was 14, a new student transferred over knowing no one. Drew was the first person to talk to her and took her under her wing, and they became lifelong friends. She loved staying active, having played volleyball, basketball and golf since she was young, and although she showed immense promise when it came to sports, everyone knew that art and being creative was her calling. She even earned the nickname Doodles when she was little because she was always drawing something, taking photographs and crafting things. Her stepdad said, "I'd look and see a blank, she'd look and see depth, variety and beauty. It was just natural for her." On November 22, 2003, Drew was working a shift at a local Victoria's Secret store in the Columbia Mall in Grand Forks. She finished at 4 p.m. and did a little browsing of her own. An hour later, she called her boyfriend, Chris. They had been seeing each other for about 5 months and he was also studying graphic design. Drew had picked up a new purse for her mom and couldn't wait to tell him that she not only got it at a discounted price, but was also able to use a gift card too. She stayed on the phone to Chris as she headed out into the cold to find her car. Drew had another shift in a few hours and was on a tight schedule. As she reached her car, Chris heard her say something that sounded like, "Okay, okay," followed by, "Oh my god," before the phone call abruptly ended. Perhaps the signal had dipped, or he only just caught half of a complete sentence. He was holding the phone to his ear using his shoulder as he was carrying boxes, and knowing she had work soon anyway, he carried on with his evening. At 7:40 p.m, Chris got another call from Drew. But when he answered this time, he could only hear static sounds, wind, and the numbers being pressed. After 20 seconds, the call cut off. Panic quickly mounted and Chris called Drew's roommate, Meg. Drew hadn't come back home. Meg called El Roco, a local bar where Drew was supposed to be working her second shift, but she hadn't turned up there either. A few unanswered phone calls later and Meg and Chris knew it was time to talk to the police and report her missing.
Please come in. Hi, I'm calling. My roommate, was supposed to be home like a couple hours ago.
How old is he?
22.
Close to 11 p.m, it was now pitch black, bitterly cold, and snow was starting to settle. Officers made their way to the car park of the mall. It was pretty empty with only a few employees parked there now, and they spotted her red car quickly. They could see the back seats had various things scattered around, changes of clothes, bags and empty food wrappers. Although it was messy, it looked more like this was just a busy person's car, someone who was here, there and everywhere, rather than someone rummaging through belongings. They saw the purse that she had just bought for her mother, and her wallet with money and cards inside, which they felt surely that would have been something to steal if this was a robbery. By the left back tyre on the ground, they found a little black case for a knife. Things suddenly took a much darker turn. They notified Drew's dad, Alan, who raced into town. Upon seeing her empty car and the police officers milling around, he was so upset and overcome with emotion that he held a small vigil next to the vehicle, describing it as a god-awful, terrible night. Crime scene experts examined the knife sheath and determined it was part of a set that was typically sold at Menards stores, which sold everything from furniture, tools and appliances to food and toys. It was a specific knife though, so that gave them something to work with. No blood was found in Drew's car and there were no signs of a struggle either. The locks didn't appear forced and nothing was damaged or smashed. It seemed likely that she had been abducted at knife point pretty much as soon as she reached her car. They knew that Drew had made 2 calls to Chris, one of which was clearly in the mall, but the second one a few hours later was to be determined. Authorities spoke to Chris straight away and he was ruled out as being involved. Her ex-boyfriend Adam, whom she'd been seeing for 3 years before Chris, was also eliminated from the investigation. About 25 miles away from the mall, they found one of Drew's shoes under a bridge, and soon they were able to track the location of where the second call had come from. It had come from somewhere near Crookston in Minnesota. Evidently, she had been taken across state lines, so they needed more help from outside agencies. Other law enforcement teams and even the FBI were soon involved in what was shaping up to be a very high-profile and media-heavy case. One investigator said that Drew was everyone's daughter, many knew her well, and people saw themselves in this situation and just wanted to help. Grand Forks residents were so worried that when officials issued a plea for volunteers to help, 1,300 people answered the call. They were motivated by Drew, they wanted to be there for her. That just drives someone when it's coming from the heart, said the Polk County Sheriff. Another detective said, in just a matter of a couple of days, it exploded. All kinds of TV trucks parked outside with their towers going up in the air. Tons of them all over the place. It was very, very chaotic, and a very different world from what any of us at the GFPD were certainly used to. At one point, there were so many requests for interviews that he couldn't manage them all himself. Some of those days I'd be coming to the station at 5 in the morning to tape something for one of the morning shows, and I might be there until 10 that night, taping something for a live newscast that evening, he recalled. Flyers with information and her face were being plastered everywhere. Emails were being sent to every UND student, faculty and staff member, and hundreds attended vigils for her. Her phone had been traced to within about 3 miles of a cell tower near the community of Fisher, and it was still pinging until about 8 p.m. several days later, when the phone was either turned off or ran out of battery. Busloads of volunteers were being transported from Grand Forks to Fisher. The buses were coming and going on the hour, as so many people wanted to join in. Quite literally every single stone was being overturned and checked twice. But even with the ATVs, dogs, huge search groups and helicopters, there was nothing. The weather was a big issue. It was brutal. Freezing cold with thick snow and ice covering the ground, making an already tiring and tough search even more tricky. But no one was deterred, and no one was giving up.
Everybody ready? Let's find her today. Let's go get Drew.
It had been easy to find Drew on the cameras inside the shops. She had been wearing a bright pink top and browsed for a while before buying the purse for her mother. She then put her long dark coat on as she made her way outside into the cold winter evening. This was a match to the time that she called Chris. The tapes were not great. They were not only dealing with not the best quality cameras, but the tapes would often be reused and taped over again and again. Police were also going through more than 2,000 leads, but within a matter of days they had closed them all. It was definitely good to rule people out, but this meant there were no suspects. Finally, 4 days after Drew vanished, investigators got a tip that felt different right off the bat. The caller reported that they saw a known sex offender shopping in the Columbia Mall at exactly the same time Drew was, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. They had run a check of people who had been charged with abductions and sexual assaults in the past and in the area, and they came up with 9 names, but Alfonso was the only one who had been classified as a level 3 sex offender. He had been released from prison after a 23-year sentence, just 6 months prior. In 1974, he was convicted of aggravated rape and attempted aggravated rape in conjunction with attacks on 2 young women. One of the women, Shirley, said she had offered to give him a ride home as she knew he was a fellow student from school. He held her against her will and sexually assaulted her. He then raped a second woman at knife point. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for this attack, but the judge did not impose the full sentence for some reason, and instead, Alfonso was placed in the Minnesota Security Hospital for treatment. In 1980, he was allowed to leave the hospital and he would strike again, attempting to kidnap and stab a third woman. She managed to run away and gave such a detailed description to the police that they picked him up almost instantly. This time, Alfonso was sentenced to 23 years in prison and had been released in May 2003. In fact, when Shirley heard about the abduction of Drew, she immediately thought of Alfonso. It had been 30 years since she was attacked, but her mind went right back there, and she couldn't stop thinking about where he might have been that night. She said, within a day of hearing about it on television and looking on the internet, I called the numbers that were listed to tell them to make sure to check what Alfonso Rodriguez had been doing that evening. This was a huge lead, and authorities who were already going through CCTV footage from the mall now had someone to focus on and a time to work with. Investigators were then able to locate Alfonso on the cameras in the mall as well. He had been walking around aimlessly by himself for about half an hour before Drew clocked off. In a Target store, he was just going up and down the CD aisle and around in circles. He was definitely looking for something, but the police didn't think for a second it was new music. At 3:40 p.m, he went to the exits and took a seat just by the doors. Clearly, the cold breeze wasn't a bother to him. He watched as people came and went, and just 10 minutes later, at 3:50 p.m, he put his gloves on and stood up quickly. He started following a blonde woman outside as she pushed her shopping towards her car. He even looked into the camera as he left. The woman he followed was not Drew, but the timing of this and his bizarre behaviour made them think. They found Alfonso in Crookston working on a construction site. This was just a few miles from where Drew's shoe had been found under the bridge.
We're working on the disappearance of this gal, and everybody's a suspect until we can rule them out, you know. What were you doing on Saturday?
Well, I went to Grand Forks.
He admitted to being in Grand Forks, saying he was shopping for clothes and watching a film. They already knew he hadn't purchased any clothes in the mall, and a quick check showed that the film was not being played at the time he said he watched it.
Tell us that you went to the movie theater, but that doesn't really pan out. We're having trouble finding you on the McDonald's videotape.
Do you think maybe you were actually somewhere else rather than the movie theater?
I don't know. No, I don't know. I know I wasn't at the mall when the film was abducted.
He let them check his car and told them he had nothing to hide. In the back and the glove compartment, they found multiple knives, and in a jar of what looked and smelled like cleaning product was a very particular blade. One of the investigators said you could have knocked him over with a feather when he saw it. It was the knife they were looking for, that was linked to the sheath found near Drew's tyre. Alfonso let them take the knife, still maintaining he had nothing to do with what had happened to Drew. He hadn't even seen her face before. He was allowed to go back to the house he was sharing with his mother, while they continued to pick apart his vehicle and his story. Experts found several spots of blood on the back window and seat. Sadly, it came as little shock when this was a match to Drew's DNA. On December 1st, Alfonso was arrested and charged with kidnapping. They had their suspect, but that was only half the battle. They still had no idea where Drew was, and Alfonso wasn't talking. But one thing was now seemingly confirmed. They would not be bringing Drew home alive. As well as the FBI and other units across state lines, Drew's family had hired a private investigator. But weeks became months, and soon it was the spring of 2004. The weather had been terrible right the way through the search, and some parts thick with snow had taken ages to melt, still hindering the search for her. Mike Headland, a sergeant in the Grand Forks Police Department, said, "I've got 3 daughters, so I thought, as a father, if I was there in these people's place, what would I want these investigators to do? I would want them to be on every show that goes out. So maybe that one person might see who might help my daughter out." There were a lot of very short nights with little sleep, and then when I would finally lay down, I would find myself looking at the ceiling wondering, what can we do different? But on April 17th, 2004, Drew Sjodin's family received the call that they were dreading. Her remains had been found in a ravine just outside of Crookston. She was naked from the waist down with her hands bound behind her back. A rope was tied around her neck which held the remnants of a plastic bag that had been placed over her head. So much time had passed that they could not determine exactly how she had died, but they did find that she had been beaten, stabbed, and sexually assaulted. She had several deep lacerations, including a 5.5-inch cut on her neck. The medical examiner concluded that she had died as a result of a neck wound, asphyxiation, or from exposure to the elements, meaning she could have been left in the cold to die. It was a crime as cruel as they come. Her dad Alan said it was an absolutely horrible day, but it was a day of relief. We knew that Druzy was no longer with us. It had been a tragic end to a huge search. Her funeral could finally be held, and along with Chris, Drew's ex-boyfriend Adam also helped carry her coffin. Both he and Chris had been supporting each other a lot, and were part of the same search parties. Because Drew's case took place across state lines, it could be classed as a federal case. Alfonso was charged with murder, and was eligible for the death penalty. It would be the first death penalty case in North Dakota in a century. He pleaded not guilty, and after many mental health evaluations, experts concluded he was not only of a sane and sound state of mind when he killed Drew, but he was mentally competent to stand trial. In August 2006, he was unanimously convicted of kidnapping resulting in death. Alfonso was sentenced to death and began serving his time in a maximum security penitentiary in Indiana.
In other news tonight, attorneys for a Minnesota man sentenced to death for killing a University of North Dakota student in 2003 are raising questions about evidence presented at trial that the student was raped. Alfonso
Proceedings stretched well into the afternoon today as a convicted death row murderer is appealing the decision.
He continued to file appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court. In 2011, as part of his one of appeals, Alfonso made a partial confession. He claimed that he had confused Drew with a college girl that had sexually abused him when he was 6 years old at a church camp. He reported to a psychologist that he immediately experienced a flood of emotions and physiological reactions. He began to dissociate, re-experiencing the abuse of his childhood. He said when she got to her car, she sat in the driver's seat talking on the phone with her head turned. As Alfonso approached, she looked up at him, and by this point, he was in a full-blown dissociative state, killing her in a blackout and panicking when he came to. This appeal was also unsuccessful. However, in 2013, as Alfonso sat on death row, he finally admitted that he had not accidentally killed Drew. It was, as everyone already knew, intentional.
Tonight, we're tracking breaking news in the longtime murder case of Drew Sjodin, a Minnesota native and North Dakota college student. Convicted killer Alfonso Rodriguez is now admitting that he killed Sjodin as he sits on death row. 5 Eyewitness News reporter Jessica Miles is working to get new details tonight. She joins us live from the newsroom with the latest. Jess?
Bill, a 416-page motion was filed in U.S. court in Fargo today, and in it, 2 medical experts who interviewed Rodriguez back in June concluded he was sane when he killed Drew Sjodin 10 years ago. Sjodin was 22 years old when she was kidnapped by knife point from a Crookston mall back on November 22, 2003. Her body was found that next spring in a ravine a mile west of Crookston. The new documents out today reveal Rodriguez didn't kill her by accident, as he has maintained while on death row. The documents also give chilling new details about how he chose her as a victim. It goes into more detail about how he killed her and how he also placed a bag over her head when she began to bleed from the mouth to prevent blood from spilling into the car. His appeals have been denied all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but under what is considered now a death row prisoner's last appeal, Rodriguez, with a new set of 4 attorneys, 2 of them here in the cities, is making a habeas corpus appeal, basically claiming he is being wrongfully held.
In a 400-page document, he admitted to everything. He said that he had followed her out and, as she was on her phone, putting her key into the ignition, he opened the passenger side door. He attacked her, and as she started to bleed from her mouth, he placed a bag over her head. He then forced her into his car, bound her arms and sexually assaulted her before she died, and he dumped her body in the snow. Drew's mother said she had no interest in knowing what else was in the lengthy document, saying it changed little anyway. It was obvious he was doing it for himself, and not because he felt any feelings of remorse.
Now, I just spoke with Drew's mom, Linda Walker, just moments ago on the phone. She said she doesn't want to know what is all in this document here, this 416-page document, but had this to say about Rodriguez.
He's an evil person, Jessica, and evil people tend to always want to use each and every opportunity to shine spotlight on himself, and he does not want to be executed, so he's using each and every opportunity given to him to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Linda says what we need to remember today is the victims, Drew and others. Now, we know Rodriguez is appealing, and we understand he has a court appearance coming up in December.
To everybody's shock, in 2021, Alfonso had his sentence overturned, meaning he no longer faced the death penalty.
I can't imagine. It just aches to hear something like this.
Tonight, reaction after the sentence was overturned for the man convicted of kidnapping and killing a UND college student nearly 2 decades ago. Convicted sex offender Alfonso Rodriguez no longer faces the death penalty.
A judge found that his constitutional rights were violated during the trial by a misleading testimony from the coroner, failure of lawyers to outline the possibility of an insanity defence, and evidence of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Bob Heels, who was the family's private investigator, said he was beyond disappointed, as it set such a bad precedent for similar cases.
Extremely disappointed. I mean, I just paused and had the whole situation flash through my mind. This happened 18 years ago. This case is an extreme example of why we have the death penalty for cases like this. I mean, if you're not going to use it in a case like this, then where are you going to use it?
He also says hearing the news of the sentencing being overturned is very difficult for him, especially on a case that still tugs at his heart.
I think my 37-year career, this is the one that sticks out in my mind as something I'll absolutely never forget. What he did was just one of the most horrific things that somebody can ever imagine, and this should have been over a long time ago.
On May 18th, 2023, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wednesday, November 22nd, officially marks the 20-year anniversary of when Grand Forks resident Drew Sjodin went missing, shocking the community, the region, and the nation.
There wasn't a whole lot going on in the nation right then.
But the nation had their eyes on Grand Forks, North Dakota.
I've never seen anything like that.
East Grand Forks Police Chief Mike Hedlund was the PIO for the Grand Forks Police Department when she went missing.
Her face is ingrained in my, in my mind. Drew's absolutely is.
He said in the time since Sjodin's disappearance, he notices the community has never forgotten her.
When I do those school talks, I'll say, who's heard of Drew Sjodin? And I've yet to have a class where nobody raises their hand. And these are kids anywhere from, like I said, elementary school and up to the high school age or even college. And they've always heard, and it's now 20 years. And there's people that weren't born, and they've heard of Drew Sjodin.
But Sjodin's memory lives on in more ways than one, including in a scholarship for young women who attend UND.
I mean, Drew's death was a tragedy to her family, to UND, to the greater Grand Forks community, and really the nation. This scholarship is a way to honor her legacy and to ensure that her memory is not forgotten.
It has been more than 20 years since Drew was abducted and murdered, but it's clear that her case is still ever present in people's minds. Her dad, Alan, said he listens to the final voicemails she left on his phone frequently, and her mom, Linda, said she strives every day to keep the promises she made to Drew. The first one was to bring her home, which she did. She also promised to dedicate her time to carry on doing the things that she never ever wanted to do, like public speaking, lobbying politicians, talking to reporters, and attending court hearings. The then President George W. Bush also signed Drew's Law, and this saw the creation of the Drew Sjodin National Sex Offender Public Registry. This is an unprecedented public safety resource that provides the public with access to sex offender data nationwide. As well as the database, you're able to report cases of sexual abuse and get access to educational papers and Q&As. A scholarship was set up in her name. A sculpture of a tree based on one of Drew's drawings marks her grave, and a little garden was made for her too. Wherever you look in her community, even all of these years on, you can find Drew. She is still very much a part of everything. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. It helps us so much and we really appreciate it.